My ex-boyfriend invited me to his wedding to flaunt his rich fiancée, but my date ended up flipping the script in a way no one expected. Dylan 30M and I 22F first met while working part-time at Starbucks. I was still in college, trying to save up enough to finally move out of my parents' house. While he was buried under student loans, his parents were deep in debt thanks to their gambling problems and couldn't offer him any financial help. At first, we bonded over sharing stories about our families, but it didn't take long before we genuinely started to enjoy each other's company. 2 years later, after graduation, I had finally saved enough to live on my own. Dylan, though, was still stuck under the weight of his loans and couldn't afford to leave his parents' place. Wanting to help, I invited him to move in with me. Because of his financial situation, he couldn't cover half the rent, so I offered to pay 80%, leaving him responsible for just 20%. He agreed without hesitation. We split the utility bills evenly. Our work lives looked very different. Dylan had a physically demanding job that kept him on site for long hours, while I worked a more flexible corporate role, with a boss who didn't care where I worked as long as I hit my goals. Because Dylan's schedule was so intense, most of the housework fell on me: dishes, laundry, cleaning, cooking, and I didn't really mind at first, understanding how exhausted he must have been. I only asked one thing, since he was usually the last one to eat. Could he at least take out the trash? Unfortunately, Dylan almost always forgot. Every morning, I'd end up dragging the trash out myself. One weekend, after a long shift at work, I came home to find the apartment in complete chaos: dirty dishes stacked high, empty food wrappers scattered everywhere, and trash overflowing. Laundry was piling up too. I was beyond furious. I was already drained from work and had been looking forward to resting. But instead, I spent hours scrubbing and tidying the whole place. When Dylan finally got home, he hugged me and said he missed me, but he didn't even seem to notice the clean apartment. He just plopped down and turned on his game, leaving me standing there, feeling invisible. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I burst into tears. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe it was the endless cycle of being taken for granted. But at that moment, it hit me how little he really valued me. He looked over and asked if something was wrong. I forced a smile, told him everything was fine, and said I was heading to bed. Before I went, I reminded him again to take out the trash. He nodded, like always. But the next morning, the trash was still there. When he sauntered into the kitchen asking me what was for breakfast, I finally snapped. I told him if he wanted to eat, he could make it himself. He accused me of being rude, and that's when all the anger I'd been holding back exploded. I started yelling, telling him exactly how useless he was. He just stood there, blinking at me like he had no idea what he'd done wrong, and told me I was being overdramatic. I took a deep breath and calmly asked him why he could never remember to take out the trash. Dylan shrugged and said he simply forgot. So I pushed further. What exactly did he do around the house besides coming home, cracking open a beer, and parking himself in front of the TV? He started rambling about how exhausted he was after work and how he deserved to relax. I nodded, admitting that he absolutely deserved downtime, but then, what about me? I reminded him that after my own long workdays, I came home and immediately got to cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, ironing his shirts, and all I asked in return was for him to take out the garbage. That's it. Dylan's response? He said he never asked me to do any of that. He argued that since he had such a demanding job, as his girlfriend, I should be helping him out. Then, as if he hadn't already said enough, he tried to justify it by saying that his mother always took care of everything for his father. Hearing that made my blood boil. I realized then and there that I had been breaking my back for someone who didn't even think twice about treating me like a maid, and we weren't even married. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him things were about to change. I wasn't his mother. and we were supposed to be equals. From now on, he would be responsible for his own meals, his own laundry, his own ironing, his own trash, everything. Dylan's eyes went wide in disbelief. He started to argue, but I raised my hand and cut him off. There was more. I told him that he would also be paying half the rent from now on. No exceptions, or he could pack his things and leave. He stared at me like I had just slapped him, asking where all this was coming from. I told him the truth. I was done bending over backward for someone who didn't even appreciate me. He clearly wanted to keep arguing, but I didn't stick around. I was already late for work. It was the first time in my life that I had drawn such a hard boundary. And honestly, it felt empowering. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. From that day forward, I only cleaned up after myself. It was strangely satisfying to watch Dylan scramble around the house looking for clean clothes or trying to iron his shirts in a rush before work. He refused to wash the dishes or take out the trash, clearly hoping I'd eventually cave in and do it for him, but I stayed firm. Even when the sink started to stink, I stuck to eating takeout straight from the containers so I could toss everything without setting foot in the kitchen. Dylan kept trying to guilt trip me, saying I wasn't being a supportive partner, but I didn't budge. When rent came due, I paid exactly 50% to the landlord and let her know that Dylan would be handling the rest. He stormed home afterward, furious, demanding that I go back to covering 80% like before. I refused. I reminded him he had never once appreciated what I did for him, and I wasn't going to be taken advantage of anymore. He made a lot of excuses, but eventually, he had no choice but to cough up his half of the rent. Through all of this, he never once apologized. Not once did he sit down with me, acknowledge how badly he treated me, or show any kind of real regret. It was disappointing. Honestly, he never once admitted that I was right about everything. Looking back now, I regret not seeing his true colors sooner. As you can probably guess, over the next few months, things between us kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent and nastier. Dylan blamed me for everything and constantly tried to gaslight me into slipping back into my old ways, the version of me that catered to him. Then I got a promotion at work, and that apparently was Dylan's breaking point. One of our mutual friends, who also happened to be my coworker, must have mentioned it to him. That night turned into the worst fight we ever had. Dylan stumbled home drunk, waking me up in the middle of the night, insisting that he needed to talk. Still half asleep, I groaned and asked if it could wait until morning. He was clearly hungover from a night of partying, but he wouldn't drop it, claiming what he had to say was important. Annoyed but wanting him to shut up, I sat up in bed and asked what was so urgent. That's when Dylan, still reeking of alcohol, started babbling about someone he had met at work. I knew exactly who he meant, Bella. I had seen her before at one of his office parties. She was young, probably barely out of college, and filthy rich, the daughter of a big-time industrialist. From what I'd heard, she only worked because her father insisted she get some real-world experience. Dylan, slurring his words, told me he was falling in love with her. According to him, Bella was a real woman, unlike me. I sat there, staring at him blankly, feeling nothing. No sadness, no heartbreak, just nothing. Our relationship had been dead for months. We were basically roommates who barely tolerated each other. He kept talking, rambling about how special Bella was, but I interrupted him. I calmly told Dylan that I honestly didn't care about his new relationship. In fact, I was happy for him. I suggested we break up amicably and that he should move out as soon as possible. He stared at me, confused and frowning, and asked if I was jealous. I smiled, shook my head, and told him I was actually relieved because now I wouldn't feel guilty about ending things. Hearing that made him furious. His face turned red with anger, and he demanded to know if my new promotion was the reason for my sudden confidence. I told him the truth. My promotion had nothing to do with us. I had realized months ago that we were no longer compatible. That whatever spark we once had was long gone. We weren't partners anymore. We were just two people sharing a space. I thought he might appreciate my honesty. Maybe even be glad for the clean break. But instead, Dylan exploded. He started shouting about how he hated modern women who cared more about their careers than about being housewives. In his mind, Bella was the ideal woman, someone who wanted nothing more than to get married and have children. Despite his yelling, I stayed calm. I kept my cool and calmly reminded Dylan that not every woman has the same priorities. Bella, who came from a wealthy family, might not care much about building a career, but I did. I liked my job. I liked being independent. I told him straight up, if he wanted someone like Bella, then he should be with her. There was no need for endless arguments. I suggested he move out as soon as possible. He stared at me wide-eyed and asked how I planned to afford the rent on my own. I explained that my recent raise covered it easily. I could manage just fine without a roommate. The moment he heard that, Dylan lost it. He started shouting about how I was trying to show off in front of him. He ranted about how Bella was far richer than I'd ever be, boasting that she even had her own house, a gift from her father. He kept yelling, telling me I needed to change, that I should be more complacent. Then he sneered and said, at the end of the day, men don't want a woman who outturns them. They want a housewife. That was it for me. I told him to shut up. I was done fighting at 2 in the morning. I gave him a deadline. He had until the end of the month to move out. Until then, he could sleep on the couch. He kept grumbling, but I didn't even bother to respond. I went back to bed and didn't give him another glance. Over the next week, Dylan started packing up his stuff, little by little. I couldn't help feeling excited at the thought of having the entire place to myself. But on his last night there, I came home and found something that made my jaw drop. Dylan and Bella were sitting comfortably on my couch like they owned the place. I stared at them in disbelief. Dylan casually said he wanted to show Bella where he had lived, since it was his last night here. The nerve! Still, I didn't want to take it out on Bella. It wasn't her fault Dylan was so disrespectful, so I politely greeted her. To my surprise, she looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. She didn't even bother to say hello. I brushed it off and went to freshen up, deciding it wasn't worth the drama. Later, while I was making pasta in the kitchen, Bella came in to get a glass of water. She stood there silently, just watching me cook, her eyes dripping with disdain. It was incredibly awkward. I asked if she needed anything. She said nothing, just kept staring. I shrugged it off and finished cooking, eager to eat alone in my room. But as I headed downstairs after eating, I heard voices, and what I heard made me freeze mid-step. Bella was laughing, telling Dylan how lucky he was to have upgraded after dating someone who looked like me. And Dylan, he laughed along. Bella then asked why he had even dated me in the first place. And that's when Dylan said something that cut me deeper than I ever expected. He admitted he had used me, said I was gullible enough to pay for our dates, to lend him money back in college. He even bragged that, thanks to me paying most of the rent for the last couple of years, he had been able to save a ton of money. I could hardly believe what I'd just heard. Somewhere deep down, I had always wondered if Dylan was taking advantage of my kindness, especially when it came to paying more than my share of the rent. But hearing him say it out loud crushed me. I had no idea he'd been using me from the very beginning. They kept talking, laughing at my expense, tearing apart everything about our relationship, as if it was some inside joke between them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry right there. But I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Silently, I turned around, went back upstairs, and curled into my bed, burying my face in the pillow as the tears came pouring out. I cried quietly the whole night, trying to release the weight of humiliation without anyone knowing. The next morning, when I woke up, Dylan and Bella were gone. He had taken the last of his things and officially moved out. I walked around the house in a daze at first, not sure what to do with myself. But then it hit me I was free. Free of the chaos, the disrespect, the constant feeling of being used. I cried again, but this time, they were tears of relief. I danced around the house, feeling light, almost weightless, then determined to make a fresh start. I spent the whole day deep cleaning every room. I scrubbed every surface, washed every fabric, and erased every trace of him. Over the next few weeks, I embraced my new life. Living alone was pure bliss. I stopped caring about Dylan and Bella, stopped replaying their cruel words. I focused on myself, on my career, on my happiness. Everything was going smoothly until 2 months later. At work, one of our mutual friends pulled me aside. With an awkward smile, she informed me that Dylan and Bella were getting married. I was taken aback. It all seemed so sudden, so rushed. She even showed me their engagement photos. Dylan and Bella posing in designer outfits, looking picture perfect and giddy with joy. I felt a small, sharp pang deep in my chest, not because I wanted Dylan back, but because I realized just how much time and love I had wasted on someone who never deserved it. But at the same time, I knew, even if they looked happy now, I would never have been happy staying with him. And that realization made me feel oddly at peace. That night, when I got home, I checked my mailbox and found a thick, fancy envelope inside. Curious, I opened it and froze. It was a wedding invitation from Dylan and Bella. For a moment, I wondered if it was just a polite gesture. Maybe they were sending one to everyone. But then I noticed something scribbled inside, in Dylan's unmistakable handwriting. I want you to come to the wedding, so you can see the grand life I'm going to have with Bella. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't an act of kindness. It was pure spite. He wanted to flaunt his new life in my face. I took a long, deep breath, trying to steady myself. All the anger, all the humiliation I had bottled up over the years started bubbling to the surface. And at that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to ignore this. I was going to get petty. I RSVPDS +1. A plan started forming in my mind, and I was determined to make Dylan regret ever sending me that invitation. That night, I grabbed my laptop and started scrolling through Bella's social media. Picture after picture flashed by: vacations, parties, selfies. I combed through every single post, searching for anything I could use. And then, jackpot, about 6 months ago, Bella had broken up with her longtime boyfriend, Jake. There were dozens of old photos of them together, prom pictures, holiday trips, dating back to high school. Clearly, they had been serious for a long time. Without wasting a second, I sent Jake a friend request from my real profile. To my surprise, he accepted within a few minutes. I sent him a message, and even more shockingly, he responded. We started talking, casually at first. I decided to be upfront. I told him who I was, that I was Dylan's ex, and that I had an idea for a little harmless payback. My idea was simple. I would invite Jake as my +1 to Dylan and Bella's wedding. At first, Jake seemed intrigued, but a little cautious, unsure why I was reaching out. So I told him everything about Dylan, about Bella, about the way they had both mocked and humiliated me. Over the next few weeks, Jake opened up too. He shared things I hadn't known, like how Bella had cheated on him multiple times during their long relationship. And the final blow. Her last affair had been with Dylan, while she was still officially dating Jake. I sat there stunned, realizing I hadn't even known the full depth of the betrayal. Jake explained how Bella had always been into older men, which made her leaving him for Dylan make a twisted kind of sense. Despite everything, though, you could hear it in his voice, part of him still hadn't completely let go of her. When it was my turn, I poured my heart out too. I told him how Dylan had used me, lied to me, humiliated me. I described the night I overheard their cruel conversation, every ugly word burning into my memory. Jake listened quietly, genuinely shocked at how Dylan had treated me. When I finished, he didn't hesitate. He agreed to come with me. I couldn't hide my excitement imagining the look on Dylan and Bella's faces when they saw us together. The day of the wedding finally arrived. I dressed carefully, elegant, confident, radiant, and when Jake and I walked in, Dylan's reaction was everything I had hoped for. His eyes widened in horror the second he spotted us. He immediately recognized Jake and stiffened, but there was nothing he could do, not in front of all these guests. We calmly found our seats, pretending not to notice him burning a hole into the back of my head with his glare. Still, Dylan couldn't resist. He stormed over and hissed under his breath, asking why the hell I had brought Bella's ex. I simply smiled sweetly at him and said nothing. He had no choice but to grit his teeth, turn around, and walk back to the altar like the angry little man he was. The ceremony began soon after. Everyone stood as the music swelled and Bella walked in, radiant in a stunning floor-length gown, her father proudly escorting her down the aisle. For a moment, you could almost believe it was a perfect day. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and soon everyone transitioned to the reception area. Bella had changed into another dress by then, something sleeker, more glamorous. She was glowing as she swept into the room, until she spotted Jake. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her smile faltered, confusion flashing across her face. Bella's eyes bounced from Jake to me and back again, her expression turning stormy. She rushed over and demanded, "Jake, what are you doing here?" I leaned in, smiling warmly, and said, "I invited him. We just wanted to show our support for your marriage." Bella's mouth dropped open slightly, furious and flustered. She turned to Jake, asking if we were dating now. Jake simply shrugged, not bothering to answer such a ridiculous question. Her face turned a deep shade of red, trying to keep the scene contained. Jake quietly asked if they could step aside to talk privately. Bella agreed, but not before throwing me a venomous glare. I watched them walk off together, feeling Dylan's eyes burning into me from across the room. He was clearly rattled but had no choice but to sit there and keep up appearances. The party rolled on around us, guests laughing, dancing, eating, but something was off. An hour passed, and there was still no sign of the bride. People began whispering, glancing around. Bella's father looked increasingly worried and finally motioned for one of the bridesmaids to go find her. Jake reached out to me yesterday and sent a long message explaining everything. He told me how grateful he was that I invited him to the wedding. He said that after Bella and he stepped outside, she broke down completely. Seeing Jake again had stirred up all her lingering emotions, and she realized she had made a terrible mistake marrying Dylan. Bella confessed to Jake that deep down she had never really stopped loving him, and that marrying Dylan was more about appearances and pressure than real love. After their talk, they decided to leave together. They used the honeymoon trip that Bella and Dylan had originally planned, needing time to clear their heads and figure out what they wanted. Jake also told me that they had talked to Bella's parents, who were very worried about her, but eventually agreed to let her make her own decisions. Jake said he would meet with me in person soon to explain everything in more detail. Meanwhile, Dylan has been trying to contact me nonstop since the wedding. He has called me multiple times and sent countless angry text messages, blaming me for ruining his marriage. I never replied because I knew I had nothing to do with Bella's decision to leave. Today, Dylan even showed up at my house. He knew I would be home on the weekend. At first, I refused to open the door and told him to leave, but he kept yelling that he wouldn't go until he spoke to me. Finally, I opened the door slightly and told him he wasn't allowed inside. He stood outside and started shouting at me, accusing me of ruining his life. Apparently, he had already quit his job, thinking he would be living off Bella's money after the marriage. Now, with no job and no wife, he was left with nothing. I listened to him for a moment, and then calmly told him that I wasn't responsible for his choices. He had used and manipulated people for years, and it had finally caught up with him. After standing there silently for a while, Dylan turned around and left. I closed the door behind him, feeling nothing but relief. I knew I had done nothing wrong, and for the first time in a long while, I truly felt free. Dylan's attention and, eventually, they started an affair. Bella explained how she was initially drawn to him because of the way he made her feel special, telling her things she had wanted to hear for a long time. She admitted that she was caught up in the excitement of being wanted, especially since Dylan made her feel as if she could be the perfect replacement for me. Bella went on to express regret for her actions, acknowledging that her relationship with Dylan had been based on lies and manipulation. She revealed that Dylan had lied to her about me, making it seem like I was holding him back and that I wasn't as attractive or supportive as she was. Bella admitted that this was all part of Dylan's game to make her feel like the solution to his problems. She told me she was sorry for her part in the affair and how she had contributed to hurting me. But she also made it clear that she never knew how much Dylan had been using me. Bella explained that she had no idea how deeply he had manipulated me and that now, seeing everything in hindsight, she felt ashamed of herself for being part of it. I listened to her apology, still unsure of how to feel. I didn't know if I could forgive her, especially given everything that had happened. But I appreciated that she was taking responsibility for her actions. I also realized that her apology wasn't just about trying to make things right with me, but also about her own need to come to terms with her past actions. After our conversation, I felt like I had finally gotten closure. I thanked Bella for her honesty and told her I needed time to process everything. Jake, who had been quiet through most of the conversation, spoke up and apologized as well. He said that he had always been there for me, even though he hadn't been able to do much while everything was happening. He assured me that he cared about my well-being and was just glad I was doing better. It was a strange, somewhat emotional meeting, but I left it feeling like I had a better understanding of everything that had gone wrong. I knew that moving forward, I would be able to put the past behind me. As for Dylan, I haven't heard from him since the last confrontation. I've kept my boundaries firm, and I plan to continue focusing on my life without any more disruptions from him. I'm also working on making my home feel even more secure and ensuring that nothing like this ever happens again. Bella shared how, after briefly hooking up with Dylan, he had convinced her to break up with Jake. He told her Jake wasn't good enough for her and that they could have a life together. Dylan sent her countless messages, telling her how perfect they were for each other, which made Bella feel guilty for cheating on Jake. Eventually, she ended her relationship with Jake, believing she could find happiness with Dylan despite the age difference between them. Bella then revealed that when she first saw me, she felt insecure about how independent I was and became jealous that I didn't seem to need a man to take care of me. She apologized for hurting my feelings, and I understood where she was coming from. I shared with her how hard I had worked to get to the position I was in at my job, and she nodded with her eyes down in acknowledgement. I then asked her to explain what had happened during the wedding. She told me that when I showed up with Jake, she was shocked to see him. In that moment, she realized how much she was still in love with him and never truly felt the same way. For Dylan, Jake had also told me that they talked privately at the wedding and discovered they both still had feelings for each other, which led them to decide to run away together. Bella had left a note for her family and had been with Jake ever since. Bella also informed me that she had spoken to her parents, and although they were angry at first, they eventually decided to support her. She was planning on filing for an annulment with Dylan, even though I didn't feel completely at peace with everything. I was relieved that at least Bella and Jake were happy now. They seemed to have found a genuine connection. We finished our lunch, had some more conversations, and eventually parted ways. Since then, I haven't spoken to either of them much, and I don't want to be involved in their drama anymore. I've decided to focus on myself, continue working hard, and let the past be in the past. As for Dylan, I hope he eventually learns from his mistakes and stops chasing after partners for their money.
And here's what I'll tell you at the very end. You watched this story to the end. It means only one thing. This video format suits you. You should subscribe to the channel to continue listening to similar stories in this format.